Greetings, I'm the one called Horror Show, and welcome to VG Therapy, the channel where I talk about games. I guess I'm on a bit of a Dreamcast kick because after playing Jet Set Radio, I feel like playing another Dreamcast game, one that I haven't gone around to yet, Maken. A game that drew me to it for two reasons. First being that it's made by a lot of the same guys who work on various SMT games, and so, since I love SMT, that means I was drawn to this. And the second thing is that it's a first-person hack and slash. You don't really see too many first-person melee games. Like there's Condemned and Xenoclash, but yeah, it's not something you see too much. And so those two things mixed with the fact that I wanted to build up my Dreamcast collection made me get this little thing. And I can just tell by looking at this is very, very Shin Megami Tensei.
Which makes sense since, as I said, many SMT devs worked on it, such as Kazuma Kaneko as art director and character designer, Koji Okada as producer, Katsura Hashino directing with Shoji Meguro, and Takahiro Ogata doing the music.
As far as Ogata goes, that's about it. Because what little bits and pieces I could find, I wasn't really sure if it was the same guy or not. But everyone else, you think of 5 SMT games and they worked on a couple.
With Koji Okada being one of the founders of Atlus and directing Megami Tensei 1 and 2, Shin Megami Tensei 2 and EF, with his involvement in the first SMT being that of a programmer. Then afterwards, he became a producer on a number of other SMT games. Kazuma Kaneko's involvement in the SMT series is large enough that it would probably be easier to say what he didn't have any involvement in. Katsura Hashino got his directorial debut with this game, and since he went on to direct SMT 3 Nocturne, the first Digital Devil saga, and every Persona game since 3, I feel that it's safe to say that he's done well.
Depending on who you ask, that is. There are some people who really like Persona 1 and 2, and so they might think less of him.
And last but not least, we have Shoji Meguro, the man who was a composer on all of the PS2 SMT games, and every Persona game except for 2. But he did direct the PSP ports for 1 and 2, and nothing else, so I guess that's something.
So now that we know there was a solid team working on the game, the question of why make something that on the outset seems like SMT in all but name arises. And that comes from a few different places.
First was that they got to take a look at the Dreamcast early on and were amazed by what it could do and what they could accomplish. So they wanted to make something for it, and mixed with the second reason, which was that by 1999 they had made a large number of SMT games, all of which were RPGs, they felt a little bit limited and wanted to try something new. So they decided to mix new ideas with new technology to make Maken X and release it in November 1999 in Japan, with the Western releases coming about half a year later, and performed well critically and sales-wise in Japan, with Western reviewers being a bit cooler on it. And then in 2001 this game got the same treatment that a number of Dreamcast games got, which was a port to another console, which contained some drastic changes that I'll get into later, as in 2003 the PS2 port was released in Europe and not America for some reason, so that means that I will be looking into it to see what they changed about the game.
So we have a selection of Atlus wanting to make something new and different hardware, and the results, critically speaking, seem to be pretty good. So what exactly is this game though?
Well, watching the cutscenes makes me feel like I'm playing SMT. From how the characters look and the kind of story being told, it just has that feel to it. And the story being told is pre-apocalyptic, as the world is going through so much strife and is on the brink of World War III being started by the US and China, and this is all being done by Geist, an evil being that is very similar to Maken, an AI that has the ability to brainjack into people and take over their bodies.
And Maken is short for Deus Ex Machina, and it makes sense in its translation rather than its literary use.
Maken was made in a lab initially to treat mental illness due to its ability to enter people's minds. However, its true purpose is that of a weapon to take down the Sangoki, who are led by the Hake, who are under the influence of Geist. However, problems arise when the intended wielder, Fei Chao Li, is unable to wield Maken due to the base getting attacked and him receiving fatal injuries, so the only one left to wield Maken is Kei Sagami, the daughter of the project's head professor. But even more problems come up when Kei's father is kidnapped, and Kei's mind is permanently bound to Maken, and if something is not done, her mind will be lost forever, with the only one knowing how to save her being her kidnapped father, and potentially a scientist named Dr. Guinness, who no one can get in contact with due to the state of the world and him living in Brazil. So it's up to you to possess as many people as you can and save the world and hopefully Kei.
And your success is determined by which ending you get, a feature I wasn't aware of until sometime later.
As I was being asked multiple questions and given multiple side quests, most of which I didn't know why I'd refuse. Until that is, I looked up to see what refusing them did and found ending guides. There are 8 different endings, and reading up on them, they do seem rather different. But I didn't get them all because while some of them do seem neat, I'm not that interested in replaying the entire game again multiple times just to see them all.
And that in of itself leads into something that I had assumed but then turned out to be wrong. And to explain what that is, I'd have to go into detail about what the gameplay mechanics are. So let's do that.
As I said at the top of this video, this game is a first-person hack and slash. You have a swing button, a lock-on button, a jump button, a strafe button, a free look button, but no block button. You can block, but to do it you have to hold back, like a fighting game. Difference here though is that there's no down back, so to block you have to start walking away, which means that either you block then attack back, dodge then punish, or like what would happen far too often, dodge then either get hit trying to get back in or walk forward and repeat the process until I successfully blocked. And at the same time, do you want to know what the B button does in combat? Nothing. So you have a button that does nothing in combat, and yet the proper way to block is by holding back. Now some games can make this work, like Metal Gear Rising for example. In that game you push forwards with good timing to parry attacks as your only method of defense. This works because the timing needs to be good, and also it forces you to stay in, as if you hold it for too long then you walk forwards towards your enemy and you can still try to parry. And when you're successful it puts you in a good position to continue attacking. Unlike Maken, where I blocked a move which opened me up to be hit by the next move because I couldn't block after blocking.
Who thought that making an enemy with a combo that punishes you for blocking would be a good idea?
Now, I am pretty sure that their method of making this work was to make it so that you're not supposed to be in a position where you need to block, as when you jump towards an enemy you land behind them, and you can attack their weak point for massive damage. So then you back away and do it again, and while moving back you're blocking.
Which would be smart design if it wasn't for the fact that I didn't find this very fun and it felt more like an exploit rather than intended strategy.
And on top of all this, the movement feels a bit sluggish and slow. Now, while I am a fan of tank controls in various games, here it just makes moving around and exploring feel slow, as turning takes a full year to do. They should have used modern first-person controls where moving left and right are on the same stick as move forward and back, and to turn and look around you use all that's right.
This means that moving anywhere in the levels isn't that fun because moving anywhere but forwards felt bad.
At times I felt like I was playing a late 90s first-person shooter, and then I had to turn a corner and I was reminded of the fact that I'm not.
And yeah, I am ragging on this game, and justifyingly so, but there are a few things about this game that I did like.
For instance, while it feels sluggish to go through the levels, I felt that they were well designed, and while the act of physically walking around the levels wasn't great, it was enjoyable to explore. Finding secrets and finding new characters was cool, as there are multiple characters you can possess and play as throughout the various levels. So finding them to see what they were like was fun. Some of them not so much because you get them after a boss fight and the bosses are either really easy or kind of tedious, so getting them is nothing great. Except for this one, she's an absolute pain. She is also a Nazi, but they censored her design and a few others in game when bringing it over to the West. So you fight weirdos in masks rather than Nazis in masks. Hold on a second.
I guess the power of Nazi science isn't very imaginative.
Now, getting a bit closer to the point I was going to make a few minutes ago, this game features a world map where you choose what level you want to do. Some levels lead to others, and there are a small amount where what you do in a level changes where you can go. And in some cases, there is stuff locked away in a level until you get a character from a different level, bring them back, and go through the new path. And I really like this idea, except for the one instance where I didn't know what I needed, and I never found out what it was that I had needed to unlock this door. But outside of that, I do like the map, and while I'm at it, the menus here are not as bad as they could be, but are clunkier than they need to be. Saving, loading, and checking your stats and the stats of other characters is done by selecting a level, which brings up these menus. Why you couldn't just press start or Y or something like that is beyond me. And also a bit clunky, but nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be, is that when changing characters you leave them where they are. So I feared that if I wanted to swap characters I'd have to play through the level again, but no, I can just do it from the world map. Although you have to select the level you left them at to swap instead of just selecting them from a menu. Like say a menu that also shows their stats and abilities at the same time.
So what was the point I was going to make?
Simply that in a game with multiple endings, like other SMT games, and where you unlock various different characters, almost like collecting monsters in SMT, and while admittedly unlike SMT, it does feature a world map with level-based stages that you can pick from, they decided that, again, unlike SMT, there is no New Game Plus. A feature that I took as a given due to it being a fairly common feature in the series, so its absence came as a bit of a surprise, especially since I felt that its multiple characters would lend itself to multiple playthroughs.
There was just a number of things I found to be clunky and weird with this Dreamcast game. And so let's see what I find to be clunky and weird with this PS2 game.
Well, they changed it to third person, so my interest has already dipped, as I doubt they'd add in more combat mechanics since they now have a pulled back camera, which makes it easy to see the battle, which means they can vary it up. But yeah, I just imagine that it'll be as basic as it was before, but without the first person gimmick. Since when did this game have a move list?
Yeah, it seems like they put more into this game than I initially thought, and so now I'm actually kind of excited to see what else it does.
Oh, each character has a separate move list. Oh, sweet. Oh, you need to level up each character individually to unlock each move. And you'll be constantly changing characters as each character you encounter is still stronger than the last. Yay! Although later on you won't be swapping as much because in the Dreamcast version you had a brainjack level that was universal and also made you pause if you hadn't learnt what the letter stood for. But here they replaced it with a system where killing enemies gets you points. And if you don't get hit then you rack up a multiplier and earn more points. That's something I can get behind. but you need to pay to go back to a previous character, and since there are a number of times where they have a specific use, and also each character has a different playstyle, means that it's discouraged to go back to previous characters. And this left me with playing a third of the game with a single character because I couldn't afford to go to anyone else. But it did allow me to get them to max level, so I did manage to get at least one character to max.
However, I didn't have as much fun with it because even though there's an expanded move list, you don't really get to experience much past the first move you unlock, and also because they changed a few other things with the combat.
Now there's a block button. Yay! Now there's unblockable attacks. Well, they are telegraphed in an obvious manner, so you shouldn't really struggle that much with it. But there's the fact that in X you could jump over an enemy to get critical hits against their back, and now you can't. And that goes for both jumping over them and the critical hits. Now this I don't like. They can get rid of the crits and it'd be fine, but jumping over them was fine and was another tool that you could use in combat. And it's not really that good of a trade for an easier block. And because the block doesn't block 360 degrees, that means that dodging and moving around is still the better defensive option, especially since it doesn't block against the aforementioned unblockables or projectiles. So it's better to get used to dodging rather than blocking. Also, in the final boss, there was a part of the fight that required that you hit projectiles back, and testing in Shao does work, but because I did on occasion struggle with judging depth, I didn't do it much. And on topic of bosses teaching you, it is good that bosses teach you mechanics, but learning from the final boss you can hit back projectiles is a bit late. And something that I learned in Shao and not X was how invincible you are during dodges. In X, I used them to move around and out of the way of stuff, but during a boss fight I blasted through an X, but here they changed him so you couldn't beat him as easily. He now has an attack that you can only avoid by dodging through because you aren't fast enough to outrun it. And since this fight is almost at the end of the game, you learn this just to fight two bosses, one of which is the final boss. And because you probably have noticed in some of my footage that another thing to consider with the camera change is the ability to see the design of certain characters you may not be able to get a good look at normally.
And speaking of segues,
Maken Show has changed how it presents itself in a number of ways outside of the camera change. For instance, they removed the English dub and left in the original Japanese audio, which some characters were fine in English. However, there were a couple of characters where I needed to question their choices in what they thought was good voice acting.
Maken, what's wrong with you? Why don't you understand our ideals?
And the Japanese version is the Japanese version. I don't know the language well enough to tell if someone is talking strange. Although it is strange that in Japanese this character has a male VA, but in English it has a female VA. Other oddities include a poor translation, which is very noticeable with the names, such as changing the spelling of K's name and changing the final boss from Geist to Mr. Meteor.
yeah, I don't get it.
More changes they've added include multiple minor ones, like an upgrade to the models and some extra animation, like how what used to be slideshows are now cutscenes. And they've added and changed around a few levels so they show off their work. Like this level where before they had a tiger man on skates attack you, in Shao they have some generic goons before this woman comes out and they changed the enemy placement because they wanted you to check out those sweet polygons that they couldn't use before.
But worry not, the enemy placement isn't the only thing that they've changed in the levels.
Like take this one level for example. In X you had to fight off some enemies and flip a switch so you go down a path to activate an elevator that you need to ride on down a different path. What they've done here is made it so you activate the elevator, ride it up, then jump back down and hit the switch and then walk all the way back to where you were.
I have no idea why they thought that a level that already had a lot of backtracking needed more backtracking.
One thing that I found interesting is that while playing X, this was the level where I formalized why I'm not big on exploring due to how sluggish the movement is. Now, I did know how sluggish the movement was in the first level, but it was here that I started to get fed up. And in Shao, I got here and the same thing happened. Because I'd expected that since this was third person, we didn't need tank controls, but they're still here. Now, I do sort of get it, because this is their workaround due to the fact that there's no second analog stick to control the that's right. Well, what does the right analog stick do, you might ask? Well, left and right makes you rotate left and right, like it does with the left stick, and up and down moves the camera up and down.
Why didn't you just map all camera control to the right stick?
Tank controls and an uncontrollable camera in an action game isn't unheard of, as a few years later God Hand did the same thing. But the key difference is that it used its right stick for dodging, where different directions dodged in different directions. And while I don't know if they didn't want camera controls and then did that because they had a free stick, or if they wanted that and sacrificed camera controls to do it. Now I'll give them that the Japanese version of the game came out in 2001, a couple months before the first DMC, so I can see them not thinking about it because quickly looking it up, the only two things I could find in regards to dual analog camera controls is GoldenEye if you plug in two controls at the same time, and Alien Resurrection, which some reviewers didn't like because of it.
So I'll give it that at the time this would have been fine, but now it just makes it feel a little bit clunky. Which is basically what these games are. They're games that at the time would have been fine, would have been great, but now they're a little bit clunky. They haven't really aged too well alongside our modern sensibilities of how these games should play. Because if there was survival horror, it would have been fine, it would have been great. But they don't have the fixed camera angles and the other things that make it a survival horror. If these games had the control scheme of God Hand, I would have loved these games. But they don't. And so there's not really that much else to enjoy about these games. There's a lot of good ideas, but at its core it's just a little bit dated. And so as a result I give these two games a 2 out of 4. Because if you're an SMT fan, there is something for you. If you like these old Dreamcast and early PS2 games, then yeah, you might get something out of it. But everyone else, not so much. And as with that, I've been Horror Show, and this was VG Therapy.